Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the Get Shameless podcast.
Get shameless.
Woohoo! And here's part 2 of our interview with Esusu co-CEO Samir Goel. Enjoy! How did you decide that it was time to quit your corporate job and do Esusu full time? And what was that transition like?
Yeah, it was it's a good question. I mean, I think it just, to be honest, the forcing function was when we couldn't do both any longer, right? Where either we picked one or they were both going to fail, right? Because when Mimo and I were both getting we were doing well in our corporate jobs, we were sort of having the opportunity for advancement. And with that comes greater responsibility and opportunity. And Esusu was also growing. And the biggest reason we couldn't raise money, or at least we were told, was because there's no full-time founders. And so it kind of got to that decision-making point, right? Where it's like, all right, well, it's kind of like go time. We got to pick one, but it really just got to that critical juncture where it's like, we can't actually do both, or they both will fail. We'll be ineffective in our day job. That's going to require more responsibility and effort, or we're not going to be able to scale Esusu because it requires both time and frankly, capital. And the capital is going to come if we're full-time and dedicating ourselves, because the VCs want to see that commitment. So.
Thank you for, oh man, just like you were saying, the like neat experience to get these cats really told you, yeah, we'd give you money, but you have a job, so we're not going to give you money to leave your job and start your own thing
until you leave your job, and then maybe we'll do it. That's a privilege too. That's even you just saying that, because I've heard that a lot.
It's the old record label thing.
Yeah.
I was 18 when I met with the record label, and they said, hey, if you make a hit, we'll sign you. And you're like, well, but
I need the infrastructure to make a hit, man. Like,
yeah,
like, if I'm doing all that, do we need you? And like, yeah, that's why it feels like a leap.
It does, because they're literally.
Yeah, and I think like, look, like I in defense of the perspective, right? Like what they want is they want you to be hungry. They want you to need it more than anything else in the world, because that increases your chance of being successful and for them to get a return. So like, that is like why. What they don't realize is that basically just creates a huge privilege barrier for anyone that might not have that luxury, right? And so it's like the point, right? And the rationale is around like, are you really committed? Are you willing to like put this first? Otherwise, like, why would we give you our money to go just like do something that's a hobby? And like, but I think the misconnect there, right, is like very few people have the capacity to just like jump ship and like do it, right?
Yeah, totally.
That's the missing link.
Yeah. They want you to also be literally hungry.
Well, and the hobby gap. Like I think that's the thing that's brought up a lot. It's like, oh, what constitutes a hobby? And you're not doing this for real, and you're not taking this seriously, and all these like weird, oftentimes fake seeming markers of validity of your business.
Yeah, I think that I think this is really interesting, because the leap is always scary. Like, I remember when I quit my job to do Brunch and Budget, and I said, okay, I just have to do it.
Well, because the shame thing is, what if I have to come back to these same people?
Yeah.
Being like,
what if you had to go back to LinkedIn a year later and be like, actually,
just let me explain the gap on my resume.
Let me explain the gap in my resume. There's so many like the systems and structures that tell you that, and also that don't just tell you, but that like show you that like failure leads to more failure in a lot of ways, you know? And I think that fear, and I just like my chest, even just like thinking about the time where I decided to quit, and for you, when you just described it, is like kind of like on fire. I'm like, holy shit, I remember that feeling, and I'm not even there anymore, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, it's been a while, and there've been so many ups and downs since then that feels pretty muted. But because the thing about building a company is every day something great happens, and every day something horrible happens, and you just sort of live with it. So like my emotional pulse has been like completely destroyed in that sense. But and in some ways it's like a muscle where you kind of get used to it. But to your point, like back in the day, right? It's like that is, to your point, that's a very good way of describing the shame, right? Where it's like, because you're going out and being like, I'm gonna go change the world, and like, you know, what's very interesting to me is like a lot of people wish they could go do that, Because of that, they almost, half of them may or may not want you to succeed.
Yeah, they
Right? Because
resent
they
you.
talk themselves out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, hey, like I got to stay the course for whatever reason, right? It's not even like people got to do what they got to do. And so in some ways, it's almost like, see, like you're not better than us. And it's like, nobody was saying that they're better than us. You know, it's literally just like, so I don't know. I feel like that whole thing is odd, right? Because everyone wants to just go do whatever they want to do.
Yep.
Like nobody's like, I live to be a corporate worker. That's like what gives me pleasure, right? Like it's not a thing. But I think a lot of people like sometimes struggle with finding that. And so sometimes when you see other people taking that leap, it's a little hard. And I think generally people just have huge egos too, right? So I think like people's own ego gets in the way, right? Where people are like, oh, I can't.
Yep.
I think like building a company, you get humbled so often, so frequently that you kind of lose that. And like, but I think it's like hard when you're not in that place to be like, oh, like what would it be like to go back and be like, hey, I tried this thing and I failed. But here's why I did it, and here's why it was important to me. And I think I've learned a lot that could be valuable. Like that's a very reasonable talk track. The reason that you don't think of it is like, one, the societal narrative you talked about, and two, in some ways, your own ego, and then three, the ego of everyone around you. But there's a way to spin anything into a positive.
You know, in that sentence with I tried and I failed, you know, even just for me personally, but I know for a lot of heads, that but feels like privilege. To be able to say I tried and I failed, but is something that a lot of people don't feel like they have access to. I think when we're talking about the shame around it, like,
yeah,
we can't take risks. I wasn't able to take a risk. So now I see you looking to take a risk and I entirely shut down.
Yeah.
What do you have a question on that? It's just like, I'm just relating to you on it. Yeah, I feel that.
Well, look, I think like this is why representation matters, right? Like you can't see what you don't see. And you know, if you think about the tech world, right, you had companies that were formed that had brilliant exits, and a lot of employees benefited and were given the latitude to take risks. Problem was that employee base was very homogenous. And one of the things that's exciting for me about Esusu is like our capital stack is 80% female, Black and brown. Our employee base, 80% first or second gen immigrants, a lot of Black and brown communities, a lot of leadership team is 50-50 on gender. I say all that not from like a stats perspective, but like what happens when Esusu wins, right? Like what happens when Esusu becomes $1 billion company, which it has? What happens when Esusu exits and is a 10 billion or a $50 billion company? It's like all those people were just given the right to fail. All those people were just given the right to invest money in their communities, to invest in people that look like them, to have a story about something that they patched together that was duct tape, like every freaking company is when you found it, and make it successful, right? And that's where like trickle down economics, right, could be a thing, where it's like, what does it look like when all the VCs that took a bet on Wamimo and I have the mandate to go find more Samir and Wamimos, when all the first 200 employees at Esusu now have hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to go build something they believe in, or invest in someone they believe in, or give money to their parents, or get their parents out of public housing Section 8 into a home, right, with a mortgage, right? All those sort of things. That's like where you can see it. Then you can start to see that narrative. It's like, oh, I knew the first employee at Esusu. This is what their crazy startup journey looks like. Maybe I can do that too, right? Maybe it's not like everyone's going to leave their job and go build a company. Maybe it's like, hey, I'm going to leave a stable job and go join a company with 10 people. You know, maybe I'm going to join, then there's some upside there, right? Like I think like we got to like reframe the possibilities that people see. And I hope that we can be a part of doing that, because that's where the upside is too.
So yeah, what you're saying there is that it's not why representation matters. This is the way in which representation matters, rather than just being a symbol, being a blueprint, and giving people direct access. Because that was the next thing we wanted to talk about, like access with that, and the shame of the access, of lack of access. And when you spoke earlier, just I want to throw out about like how you were able to deal with these failures. It kind of feels like the muscle that you built was built through pride. Like the opposite of the shame of this is like all the shames that you would get from the failures and the mistakes are then superseded by you being proud to give other people the opportunity to take risk that they didn't have before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, look, ultimately it's our responsibility to pay it forward, right? Like the thing that I get so excited about thinking about like long term, right? Like people talk about the PayPal mafia, they talk about the Facebook mafia, the Google mafia. What does the Esusu mafia look like? And how does that ripple effect change what technology, what entrepreneurship, what real estate, what communities of color look like throughout this country?
Oh my God.
What happens if you give 200 Black and brown people a couple $1 million to go invest in the things that they believe in their communities? How does that accelerate the rate of change and wealth creation and opportunity in this country?
Yeah.
So yeah, enable people to make risks instead of just sacrifices.
Yeah, that is freaking beautiful. That is freaking beautiful.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. I think that Pam and I don't always necessarily come from that perspective with regard to businesses, because there are a lot of institutional barriers in place, and there are a lot of folks who have extreme pessimism plus the power to say no about the ability of doing good, helping people, and working and being something that's financially solvent.
So you can't get told no like 5 billion times without being an optimist. So I gotta. They say like every entrepreneur is unreasonably optimistic. So I will say, like, generally, I'm always thinking about how do we make progress? How do we move the ball forward, even if it's 1 inch at a time? That's always my focus.
No, totally.
I want to dial down into that. I'm always thinking about listeners and stuff, and like where we're at. Like, what is one of those things that you can hold on to? What is one that you've held on to?
In what sense?
Just like making sure that you're like, I'm here and I'm an optimist and I believe in these things. And I know you can't be an optimist about all of the stuff, right? Like there's realities or something bad, but like, what has been a shining light, either in the past or maybe even one you've got right now, that allows you to maintain the optimism?
So one is like, for me, it's like the impact we're actually having in people's lives, right? Seeing every single person who's like, hey, I joined Esusu and I used to live in public housing. And now I'm a homeowner. Like, think about that. Generational poverty, right? Like, how many cycles of families do we know that live in public housing? And like, hey, I'm now a homeowner, right? Like, we had a person that I've talked about in interviews before. His name's Scott Falk. He was a carpenter for 20 years. During COVID, he lost his job. He spent through his savings. He's like, guys, I'm going to be homeless. Like, help. Gave him a 3-month loan. He got a job. He got a job that paid him more than what people would I get paid, and at the time, and he paid back his thing, his 0% interest loan that we gave him, and he's like, "This is the best thing that ever happened to me." Like, it's both the little stories and then it's like the big picture story, not little, but like the personal stories is a better way of putting it, and then the big picture on like, we did this research with Freddie Mac to see like what we've been able to accomplish together. And they've helped us kind of grow into 250,000 rental units, through which $2.4 billion of equity has been unlocked, $1.4 billion of mortgages and homes, $500 million in student education, $500 million in car, and some other kind of credit and loan products. And so seeing that meaningful change means that, as shitty as any given moment might be, it's like, it's for something that's bigger than myself. And that's like what helps me kind of work through whatever else I might be experiencing. The other thing is, if you want to take a pessimist look at it, like, once again, like, the system is broken. Like, what do we have to lose? Right? Like, this system right now doesn't work. So like, why not try to do something better? And if we get it wrong, we get it wrong. But one thing I can tell you is the status quo doesn't work. And so, let's try to do something better, and we'll learn along the way and we'll figure it out. But we can't just keep doing what we've been doing, because that's, as you've mentioned, systematically ineffective and perpetuates a lot of systemic barriers for Black communities, brown communities, women, other kind of disadvantaged groups, and it just doesn't work. We got to do better. So like, why not try?
Yeah, no, I love that. In the story that you told, you referred to a program that you have, a rent relief program.
Yeah.
And I wanted to touch on that because you talked about it so casually. Oh, we just gave him a loan. That's a huge deal, to be able to give someone a loan to pay their rent, to get through a really hard time. And no bank would ever do that.
I mean, that's why payday loans exist.
Yeah, no financial institution would ever do that unless they're charging like 1,000,000%, right? And so it's such a small detail, but it's such a huge detail at the same time. How did the rent relief program come to be for y'all?
You know, it's something we've always thought about, because as I mentioned earlier, we've always been thinking about like financial shock, right? And like the role that like one or multiple time emergencies have in like permanent poverty. And credit is one piece of that. The other was like short-term capital. And like I said, credit always kind of operates as though you're guilty until proven innocent. And so the way that it's looked at is like, hey, Pam, Dyalekt, I don't know anything about you, so I'm just going to assume you're a bad credit risk.
Right.
And because you're a bad credit risk, I'm going to give you a 500% interest rate. But that's not even logical. Like, where did we get that, right? Like, what actually happens if we just lend to someone who is low to moderate income and see what happens, right? And you know what's crazy? Is people actually repay us a lot. It's like over 70%, right? Because people are just happy to be given a chance. And so for us, it kind of came to a fruition around COVID when we saw this like insane crisis for renters. And we kind of launched the Rent Relief Fund well before there's any government programs and interventions. But really what we were thinking about is like, how do we stand by our renters? How do we stand by our landlords? And how do we actually prove that you can lend and give equitable kind of opportunity to low to moderate income communities? And we should. And now we have a huge loan book that we can now go to more mainstream capital and say like, look, why aren't you providing quality financial products in these communities? Why are we leaving them to relegate with payday loans and pawn shops when you're missing out on your own market opportunity? Like, why is someone in a low income neighborhood not able to get the same damn Chase Sapphire card that all of us might have, right? Like, what are we doing here? And like, now we actually have the data to prove it, because there was no data to say that because I don't know anything about you, you're a bad credit risk. Like that literally the definition is we have no data. There's nothing that we're basing that decision on. But now we have some data to talk about, well, what happens if we do lend to people that don't have a credit infrastructure, and can they repay? And maybe what this eventually becomes is governments emulating this model as a way to create a safety net to avoid homelessness. Or maybe what it becomes is philanthropy turning into first loss. So that way we can help financial institutions reduce the risk of lending in low income communities, but they can still do it, right? And they can do it at a way that's favorable and equitable and decent for the communities that we're operating in.
Ooh, you know, we were about to ask you about like what the next thing that y'all are solving. I just wanted to like stop and show like right now it seems like you're in the middle of proving to large entities that poor people, unresourced people are not bad people, are not untrustworthy people, that these people are just as likely to be reliable as people with higher net worth. These people are just as likely to be excited about a business, to care about their family, to want to build in their community, to have innovative ideas as people who come from a lot of wealth. And that idea, as tenuous as it still feels even saying it, is really amazing.
It's revolutionary.
In the literal sense.
Yeah.
Like you're moving a wheel.
Thanks, folks. I appreciate that. And it's literally what we believe in, right? Like at the end of the day, like one of the things that frustrates me is like all the assumptions people have of less resourced or lower income folks, where it's like I love financial literacy, but sometimes when people talk about financial literacy for lower income communities, it's because they think they're irrational or they don't know how to spend money. And it's like, why don't you just go to Sam's Club and buy like 100 freaking toilet rolls? And it's like, no, like you're making a very rational and intelligent decision based on your present day needs. And the fact is that our society is structured and our pricing is structured in a way where you're penalized for that. But every decision that most people who have less money make is super rational. And you know, and it's just the way that our systems treat them is actually more irrational than the actual decision making of the family.
Yeah.
No, it's so true. And I think you actually have to be more rational when you have less money, because there's less room for mistakes and there's less wiggle room.
Which you've got data to prove.
You have data to prove. Yeah, people pay their loans back. They honor them, you know. So.
And that's why I love rental data too, right? Because like when you're operating from a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, rent, number one.
Yep.
Right? It's
like, pay that.
Over the heck. I'm going to pay that before I pay whatever car issue or medical bill or whatever. Like Maslow's hierarchy, your roof is number one. And so it's also like a very good indicator of what will get paid when people have to make difficult choices based on limited income.
Yeah, I love it. So what is next for Esusu? What's the next big thing that you're going to tackle?
I mean, we definitely got our hands full with what we're trying to do today. But I think ultimately, right, we are trying to grow with our residents on this journey of financial identity all the way through wealth creation. And so the steps on that journey for us is it starts with financial identity. The next step is financial stability. Then it's some form of financial wellness and ultimately wealth creation. And where we play today is very much phase one and somewhat two. Credit as financial identity, our microloan program or rent relief as sort of stability. And now we're starting to think about, well, like I said earlier, like all of our renters are aspirational. They all want more. They all want to do things. And so how can we be that partner with them on their journey? And so that's really where we want to go next is like, if they want to go get a car loan, can we help underwrite that at a better rate than what's in the market? If there's products that aren't in the market today that can benefit our communities, maybe we can help create them. And what we're doing is over time, investing in people and communities that aren't being invested in, building trust. And then our hope is what that translates into is they're going to look at Esusu as their go-to partner. And over time, we grow with them as their needs evolve and as they move towards wealth creation and opportunity. A good example is recently FHA, Freddie, Fannie started taking rental data as an alternative to a FICO score.
Yeah.
So now when a renter wants to be a homeowner, maybe we can be that data plug, which we're already speaking about, right? So there's a lot of opportunity on that continuum because that's directly impacting wealth creation. And ultimately our vision is to bridge the racial wealth gap. And so that is how we kind of get towards where we need to get to.
I love it.
Oh, I know that's really good. Do you see any, as you're saying that, like, people are becoming more aware of like taking rent and things like that. Do you see impediments on the horizon that we're going to have to start dealing with financially as credit users now that they're more aware of the systems that people are using to get around the credit stuff?
Yes and no. I mean, I think like what's interesting to me is like there's a general consensus that the way we do things doesn't work. Right. So like there's always adverse action risk. And we need to be cognizant of that and we need to be intentional. And we always need to think about how we kind of manage that. One of the things that we do at Esusu is we only report positive data. The reason for that is because negative data has actually always been reported to the credit bureaus.
Of course,
When you're sent to collections, that data is there. Like we don't need to create double jeopardy. Let's just focus on helping people have opportunities who are not given them, right? So like there's like little things like that we're thinking about that we can do to kind of be intentional in system design. Wow. What's up, Dyalekt? You definitely have something.
Because you went there, I want to know the further detail.
Wow.
Can you tell me something that some big money fundery person said when you told them that you don't do negative reporting? Did anyone have like a flabbergasted reaction? They're like, what you talk about?
Oh, absolutely, right? Like there's many people who are like, they're like, we've even had people who are like, we only want to do negative reporting. That's why we're contacting you. That's literally why. That's like the reason we're reaching out to you. Like, I don't care about the positive stuff. Just report the negative data. And I'm like, I think you got the wrong company. Like, seriously. But once again, like I always try to reframe it, right? It's like, at the end of the day, you already have needs to do negative data and negative reporting. If you want to do that, go do you. I'm not going to stop you. That's not what we do, right? Like you already have that mechanism. And then two, like we're actually protecting your reputation. We're doing you a favor. Do you really want a headline that talks about how you're evicting all these people? Or do you want to talk about how you're helping people? Do you really want a headline where it's like you're partnering with a company to report negative data to the credit bureaus? No. You want the headline that talks about how you're helping people and doing the right thing, right? So I try to reframe it in a way that will make them kind of reconsider how they're even approaching it in a capitalistic way still, but still it's a reframe, right? Yeah. But no, to your point, we've definitely got everything under the sun. It's like, literally, I want to give you 10 residents that I want you to report to the credit bureaus for not paying me rent. And that's like all we're going to do. It's like, all right, like, look, if that's all you want and I can't change your mind, like go talk to someone else because we're not doing that.
Ooh, and that's where, I was mentioning before about values. That's the line, right, between hungry and thirsty.
Yeah, ultimately, like, we also understand that we're playing a long game. Like I said, we're in inning one, right? Ultimately, we want to build relationships with renters and with our communities and kind of grow together. And I genuinely do think I do think doing that is beneficial for our customers and for us and for our renters. Like, I genuinely do think that it is not optimal for a corporation to incorporate a new alternative data to the credit reporting system to go report negative data.
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to benefit them in the long run. It's not.
Yep. We agree.
And I'll argue that case. And look, I can bring you to the water and you can choose whether or not you drink it, but I will at least try to give you an argument in a language that you can process, and hopefully it resonates. And if it doesn't, that's okay. There's other people you can go work with. But I think genuinely, like, people want to figure out a win-win.
Yeah.
And I think, like, part of what's happened in our society more broadly today, sorry to be like so soapboxy, but it's like it's so like us versus them, divide and conquer, et cetera. And I'm like, can we just find like a win-win? Like let's just figure out a way so that everyone gets something so that we can keep moving forward, rather than this sort of like extremist thing that everything seems to become, right? And so for us, it's like most landlords, like very few owners and operators and institutional capital providers are literally like, let me just do the wrong thing. Like, please give me a reason to do the wrong thing, right? We just need to make it easy for them to do the right thing. That's how I think about it.
You need to make it easy for them to do the right thing. That's it. That's it. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions?
I mean,
I know we took up more of your time too. So
I mean, really, like, yeah, no, you hit all of the stuff that we want
get
to
off
talk
all
about.
the soapboxes, please. We love
Yeah,
them all.
you know, we love it up in here, and we ask, and thank you for allowing us to dig into the personal parts, into the uncomfortable parts, because just the real is you have an awesome looking successful business that's got a lot of money come in and got a lot of success and got a lot of people helped, and even that itself, I know seems daunting. Your success, because many of us are still caught up in that binary violence, fighting, one-on-one, dog eat dog paradigm. And remember, y'all, you've never met a cannibal dog in your life, so but we were all in that kind of thing. So it's hard to accept that your success can and will mean the success of others, even people like that in the space. So it's just a lot for us to be really doing and sitting with. Thank you for getting real on that tip.
Yeah. Thank you. Is there anything else you want to say before we
any other soapboxes you want to get on, like ones that
I think I'm good. I think I've probably talked everyone's ear off at this point, but Dyalekt, Pam, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate your intentionality, the thoughtful questions you posed, and to be honest, you've been following our journey from day one. So I appreciate you believing in us before a lot of other people did, right? That means a lot to us. And so we're grateful to have folks like yourself in this fight with us in the ecosystem, and glad to spend some time together.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great to be in community with you, in collaboration and not in competition.
Yes, exactly.